So we're gonna hit record.
Yeah. I'm
Um,
okay with that.
and
Okay.
I know your time. We have till about 30 minutes. I don't know if you have the hard out on that because we want to make sure what's your. We'll try to get there.
Yeah. Definitely. That should be okay.
Should be okay. Okay. All right. So we'll do our best on that. I don't want to take up any more time. Please feel free to say hello. I don't mean to stop that. I just want to make sure we can get as much of your good answers as possible. And I will pull myself out. And if there's anything that you feel uncomfortable with, or you want to stop for a second, we'll edit this. It's not going to be just cut up, but we'll edit this down. So please feel free to stop if you have to or anything like that.
Okay, that's great. But I think we'll be okay.
Okay, great.
I think we'll be okay.
Great. Whenever you're ready, Zahar and Elon, look forward to
I'm ready.
Great.
I'm ready.
Okay. Welcome, Dr. Pape. It is such an honor and a pleasure to meet you. I am familiar with your work, and thanks to these YouTube channels, I've seen a lot of your thought and about what's happening in Israel, Gaza, the catastrophe that we are facing at this very moment. So thank you for all that you do to help us understand the context, the history, and for our King and Breaking Silence audience, we would like for you to do some of that contextualization for them. And of course, if you could summarize some of the myths, and as you do in your book, 10 Myths of Israel. Of course, you go over it very thoroughly. We have a limited amount of time. So I sort of pulled out a few of those. The myth that Palestine was a barren desert before the Zionist project, the land without a people for a people without a land. Could you tell us something about that, please?
Yes. Thank you, Zahara. It's a great pleasure and honor also to meet you. And thank you so much for having me in this very important platform. Yes, let's get into it. The myth that Palestine was a barren desert, surprisingly, is still supported, or still is still something that people in important positions in the world still subscribe to. When Israel celebrated its Day of Independence just a few months ago, the president of the EU said that Israel bloomed the desert, namely that Palestine was a desert and Israel bloomed it. I mean, and this is the president of the European Union, a very powerful person, is still subscribing to this. So let's quickly say something about both of them. I must say that also in the book, I'm less concerned whether the Jews were people without land or were not people without land. I see this as a narrative that many Jews believed that they were the descendants of the Jews who lived in Palestine 2,000 years ago. I have my doubts whether they are the descendants of these Jews, but that by itself doesn't harm anyone. You know, if Zohara, if you tell me, I think that my ancestor 2,000 years ago were there or there, I may, as a scholar, say I would like to check it or not, but there's no harm in this. That is the less important one. What is important is that they claim not only that they were the people of that land, but that that land had no people for the last 2,000 years. And that's a dangerous myth because there were people on the land. And if someone believes that these people on the land do not belong to the land, there's always a danger that someone would use force to remove them. So let's just get the record correctly, because there's so much literature, there's so much documentation, so much evidence to show that before the Zionists arrived in Palestine in the late 19th century, Palestine was a vibrant society. It had a very rich rural countryside and a very educated and important urban elite as well. There were hundreds of thousands of people, probably more than 500,000, living there, seeing themselves as part of the country of Palestine, see themselves as part of the Arab world. Quite a few of them saw themselves as part of the Muslim civilization. They were undergoing processes of modernization, becoming a nation as well. Everybody was becoming a nation in the 19th century. There's nothing new about that. But the one thing we can say with 100% certainty, Palestine was inhabited by the Palestinians on the day that the first Zionist settlers arrived. And not only that, even with all the efforts of the Zionists from the early arrival in the 1880s up to the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, the indigenous Palestinian people remain the vast majority of the people, despite of the attempt to create a settler state there. So I think that's a very important myth to debunk, especially the myth that Palestine was a land without people. It is a fabrication, and as I said, it's a dangerous one.
Oh, yes, thank you. I certainly agree how dangerous it is. And I know, growing up in the Baptist church, the Black Baptist church in the South, that was what we were told, these were the Israelites, and
Exactly.
we hadn't even heard of there being Palestinian people. So I agree totally with you. The story of the Zionist project from the late 18th century is something that you have written about. You speak about the British role in making the project happen and what their interest in it was. Could you speak to that, please, also?
Yes. That's also a very important, informative chapter in history, because the fact that there were Jews in Europe who believed that Palestine belonged to them and were aiming and taking over Palestine was something they could not do without the assistance of a big imperial power. So there was no possibility for a Zionist colonization of Palestine without an imperial British assistance. And the Zionist lobby was very effective up to the end of the First World War to persuade the British political elite that, first of all, including Palestine in the British Empire was a British interest, because up to the First World War, Palestine was part of the Turkish Empire. The Ottoman Empire did not belong to the British. And the other aim of the Zionist lobby was to persuade Britain that Palestine should not only be British, but also should be Zionist. And because of certain notions of evangelical Christianity in Britain, who believed that the return of the Jews would precipitate the second coming of Jesus and the resurrection of the dead, and some of them were very pious evangelical Christians. So this whole vision of a Jewish Palestine took to them from a theological point of view, and strategically because of Islamophobic and racism towards Arabs. The British thought that having a Jewish state is better than having an Arab state there. And on top of everything, and that is something that is relevant to our time, Zohara, there is a uniformity of purpose here between people who hate Jews, who are anti-Semites, and don't want to see the Jews either in the United States or in Britain, and the idea that they should be in Palestine. So Lord Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary, who gave the famous promise to the Zionist movement, even before Britain occupied the whole of Palestine, he promised the Zionist movement, we will help you to turn Palestine into a Jewish state. He was one of the greatest anti-Semites in Britain. The reason he supported the idea of a Jewish state in Palestine was that he didn't want the Jews in Britain. And that kind of alliance between anti-Semitic people around the world and their support for Israel that surprises people, because they say they hate Jews because they are Jews, and yet they support Israel. Yes, they support Israel because that means that the Jews will not be with them. They would be in Palestine, and we don't care what they do in Palestine. So I think that that connection with Britain is important to understand the very complex relationship between Judaism, anti-Semitism, Zionism, and the Western support for a project that, in the end of the day, was a project of displacing the indigenous people and replacing them with European settlers.
Thank you. And so that takes me to the question about the Nakba, the 1948 Nakba. Was it planned, and why?
Yes. Zionism, as we can see from our previous kind of dialogue we had up to now, is what you would call a settler colonial movement. And in the United States, you're very familiar with settler colonialism because, after all, it was created as a settler colonial project. And there are similarities between Palestine and what became the United States. In both places, you had native population, indigenous population, and it was eliminated for the sake of building a European country. In America, in addition, of course, was the genocide of Africans who were brought as slaves. But the treatment of the indigenous, the Native Americans, and the Native Palestinians has a lot in common. Why do I say this? Because Israel, until today, is still a settler colonial state. And the basic impulse of a settler colonial state is to get rid of the indigenous people. Now, they can't always do the things that people were able to do in North America in the 17th century or 18th century. Zionism appeared a bit later on the map, but nonetheless, it devoted its energy, its visions, its capacities to try and get as much of Palestine as possible with as few Palestinians as possible. And the historical juncture of 1948, the year that the Palestinians called the Nakba, which in Arabic is the catastrophe, the historical juncture of 1948 was very unique. It was a year in which Britain decided it cannot rule Palestine anymore. It was the year that the Jewish settler community became 1/3 of the population. It was a year in which Europe felt very bad about the genocide of the Jews during the Holocaust in the Second World War, and was willing to help the Zionist movement to fill the void left by the British with the creation of a Jewish state, turning a blind eye to the fact that the Zionist leaders were very clear that if they have the chance to create a Jewish state instead of the British mandate, they would do it by massively expelling as many Palestinians as possible. So the moment the Zionist leadership understood that Britain decided to leave Palestine, they began a systematic planning of a massive expulsion of the Palestinians, which I call the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And within 1 year, they expelled half of the Palestinian population. They destroyed half of Palestine's villages, more than 500, and they demolished most of the 12 Palestinian towns and took over nearly 80% of Palestine. So the Nakba is this huge ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, but it's not only expelling people. As you know, such a disaster means you cut people's career, their hopes, their future, the human capital that they brought with them. So it's much more than just a physical uprooting. And Israel did something else, which is very important. It built on the ruins of the Palestinian villages and towns, Jewish settlements, or planted trees and created recreational parks. So there was an attempt to erase the Palestinian physically from Palestine, but also to erase their presence from history as well. Because they only expelled half of the Palestinians, and because of the Palestinian resistance movement, this ethnic cleansing was incomplete. And how Israel wants to complete it, we have seen in the last 3 months in Gaza.
Yes. Yes. We will touch on that. In your view, can Israel change itself and work for a just and equitable solution to the occupation, in your view?
I'm afraid my answer to this question would be quite negative, and I don't say it willingly, and I don't say it gladly. But I know my society very well from the inside, and I'm afraid that uh, in the present situation, and looking towards the near future at least, I can see no hope for a change from within the Israeli Jewish society. On the contrary, I think it would become even less willing to any kind of a solution. It would be less willing to end the occupation. It would become more racist, more theocratic as well, and it will have even less inhibitions in the way that it would oppose any Palestinians' attempt to defend themselves or to demand their civil and human rights. And this is an important analysis that if one shares, one understands that the only way of bringing a change in Palestine is to help the Palestinians from the outside. Hopefully with non-violent means, could be very much as the international community eventually was willing to be galvanized in order to help the ANC by imposing sanctions on South Africa. There are various means in which the international community can pressure Israel, especially the United States, to change its policy and to end the occupation, but don't expect the Israelis to do it by their own volition. And I think that this is an important lesson to be learned for anyone, especially in the United States, that keeps talking about a peace camp in Israel, or even goes further than that and claims that the Israelis always wanted peace, but these Arabs, they always wanted war. All these nonsense has to be removed from the public discourse, because the issue in Palestine is a Jewish state, a racist state that still hopes to make much of what used to be Palestine a Jewish space without the Palestinians.
And now we are here where there is genocide actually taking place in live time. We're watching it happen. And yet our own government, which everybody thinks could play a role in really bringing the current slaughter to a stop. And as you well know, our president and his cabinet are adamant against a ceasefire. So I'm here in the US, and I know I'm working with the National Council of Elders, the Jewish Voices for Peace, and other groups. But would you just speak more about what you see as the role that we here in the US can play?
Yes. Yes, I think first of all, you're absolutely right. I still see people argue, especially in the West and especially in the United States, with this definition of what Israel is doing as a genocide. But I think anyone who knows the facts and knows something about the definitions of genocide cannot come to any other conclusion than what we are watching, as you say, daily, is a genocide. And it is not a genocide that is going to end soon, unfortunately. So that's very important. Yes, the American position, for me, is not a surprise that either a Democratic or Republican administration would give Israel a carte blanche, would voice some concern, but a meaningless concern, and would give Israel the time to continue with its policies on the ground. This is not surprising. Anybody who knows the history of American policy towards Israel, anybody who understands the power of the lobbies in plural. People think there's only AIPAC, but there are many more lobbies in America that have been working for a century. You know, a 100-year multi-layered lobby is one that ensures that politicians like Biden don't even have to be reminded by the lobbies that they should give Israel a carte blanche. This is something the American system would have to deal with, and hopefully a younger generation of American politicians will be a bit more immune to this kind of pressure. Now, what can we do? What can be done? Because whether we like it or not, America is probably right now has the power to stop at least the killing on the ground. I think the international community, the global South, would have also the power later on to maintain that kind of pressure. But the immediate ceasefire has to go through Washington, it seems, despite all the very noble efforts by countries such as South Africa and Turkey to bring, and lately also Chile and other countries. That would not be enough. The key is in Washington. So, and I'm impressed with the civil society in America. I think they're really doing all they can to pressure their people, demonstrating, pressuring, and so on. But I always say, and Zohara, you're even, I think, even a more veteran activist than I am, although I'm not a baby anymore, 70 years old. I think we both know that if your activism is not producing what you want it to produce, you don't sit and lament about it. You say, so maybe I have to double my efforts. Maybe I have to triple my efforts. Maybe I have to think out of the box. Maybe there are other things I can do legally, politically, morally, and not give up every day to think again, am I doing enough? Am I doing everything that I can? Am I building the right coalitions and alliances? And I think this is not criticism. This means that, you know, the proof is on the ground. The proof is on the ground. Does a year of election in America, can the conclusion for me from the outside, I'm not an American, I'm looking at the year of election 2024, and I ask myself electorally, not just for a president, but also to those who should be looking for positions in the Congress.
Yes.
Is it electorally wise to support Israel or to condemn the genocide? And if the answer from America would be, from most politicians, including the presidential candidates, it's better to support the genocide than to oppose it, then the problem, it's not only the Palestinians that have a problem.
Yes.
That whole United States has a problem. If this is the moral face of America, that supporting a genocide is an electoral bonanza, is an electoral asset, God knows what is the future of America.
I completely agree. And even though, as you know, I've been working to change America for 60 years, and every day I wake up and am shocked that the president and the Congress are holding the line on supporting genocide. I mean, even I, with all my criticisms of my government and my country, I'm shocked, Elon. I'm shocked. And so I agree. We must bring the fact that there is an election, and some of us are doing that already, saying, if you don't change, you can forget my vote and anybody who I can influence's vote. And I think many of us are beginning to push that. But in the meantime, the people in Gaza are dying. I mean, every day that we delay, hundreds more are killed. It's unbelievable. I really was so focused on getting us into this that we didn't even talk a little bit about your trajectory, how you, as an Israeli Jewish person, came to your understandings, your scholarship, and I've heard you say that, but would you just say a few things about that to our audience?
Yes, definitely. It was a trajectory. It was not a process, not an epiphany. I mean, it was not one big moment where you suddenly see the light in a way, because I had a very conventional Jewish Zionist upbringing, and it was only through the beginning of my academic career as a professional historian that certain discrete influences began to shape a different point of view. And one of them was my love for history and my wish to understand the history of the place in which I was born. And it was very natural for me to look at the most formative year of that place in the modern era, which was 1948, which meant I went to the documentations and the archives and so on. And the picture that unfolded was very, very different from the one I learned about in school or heard from my parents. And it was quite a clash between what you knew and what you revealed. But I also was lucky in a way that I decided that a good professional career as an historian needs to take you out of your own country, out of your comfort space, comfortable space, so to speak. And I went to England, and by coincidence, I had an Arab supervisor, and that was an important moment of hearing from a very educated intellectual views that in my own state were regarded as propaganda and stupid and reductionist, and listening to him and learning from him had a huge impact on me. And then came, which always happened, I think, in people's lifetime, there are certain catalytic events, formative events that you cannot ignore. For instance, the first Intifada in 1987, the first Palestinian uprising, was a very important moment. I was able to meet Palestinians who resisted. I understood much better from my own historical research why they are resisting, and began also to be on a much more equal footing with them, because mostly if you stay in Israel, it's very difficult to meet Palestinians on an equal footing. So all this contributed to a change of mind, of views, and there's a moment where you, so to speak, cross the river and you don't look back. You don't look back. You are at peace. At least you are at peace with yourself, if not with everyone else around you. But you are at peace with yourself, and
Right.
you know that you are doing the right thing.
Thank you so much for doing the right thing,
Thank you.
because your research, your writings, all of the many speaking engagements that you do have helped this movement toward a justice and a peace in Israel to come about. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zohara. Thank you. Thank you for the time, and I hope we will meet soon again.
Indeed, and in person, hopefully.
Even better in real life. Who
Yes.
knows?
Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you very much.
Ilan, can I ask you one question you can maybe address?
Yes, Bill, of course.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, and I'll pull myself off.
Don't worry.
Anti-Semitic conversation, anti-Semitic speech in the United States has become, you've probably seen some about it. I mean, literally have, elites going at it about what is anti-Semitic. This is something I've talked to Eric Chaffetz an awful lot about what we're doing to, anti-Semitism does exist, but what we are doing to the language when we continue to continue everything. Is there anything you have thoughts on about that is from an American audience could be helpful? I'd love to hear you speak to that for a moment. I know we've taken up more of your time.
No, it's okay. It's okay. In fact, the book that Zohara mentioned, The 10 Myths of Israel, has also a chapter which question the myth that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
Right.
And what you can learn from that is, and that is also a message for the Americans, is that first of all, you need to understand that the Judaism and Zionism is not the same. That's very important. There's a difference between religion and ideology, between faith and ideology. White supremacist Aryan nation people in America are not the only Christians, are not representing Christianity, nor does their ideology equate with Christianity. And the same is true about Zionism and Judaism. So that's one thing to remember. It's also good to know, though we cannot change the language there, that the Arabs are Semites as well. So this whole idea that Jews you are anti-Semite is ridiculous. But the most important thing I really think is, and I always suggest it to people who are intimidated when people try to silence them by weaponizing the anti-Semitism. And people, it's not nice to be called an anti-Semite because it means that you are racist, and people don't like to be called that. Nor do they want other people to think about them in that way. And my suggestion to anyone who is knowledgeable about what goes on in Palestine and knows a little bit about Judaism and about Zionism, and most people know, even people who sometimes are kind of shell shocked when they are being attacked as anti-Semites. Remember that the people who equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism or criticism on Israel with anti-Semitism can only be one of two things. Either they're totally ignorant, which is possible, and then you should tell them that they're ignorant and send them to read something, and don't continue the conversation, because if they don't know anything, how can you have a proper dialogue with them? Or, which is worse, they know the truth, but they are lying and they're fabricating. So either they're idiots or liars, but you should not be intimidated or terrified by this, because morally, scholarly, academically, factually, any way you look at it, anyone who stands against the genocide in Gaza, anyone who condemns the occupation of the West Bank, anyone who condemns the apartheid system against the Palestinian citizens of Israel, anyone who supports the right of the Palestinian refugees to return, is someone who is against racism, is someone who is against colonialism, and is someone who works for humanity and human rights and civic rights. So if someone like this is being condemned by someone as racist, they should be immune from these kinds of accusation, because they are standing for noble ideas and they are struggling for justice. People who struggle for justice cannot be undermined by accusations of racism and hatred or bigotry. The people who accuse them are the ones who are racist and bigots. As I say, or maybe in the best case scenario, are just ignorant. So take the time to explain to them if they have the time, or just tell them, go and read something. I don't want to publicize my book, but tell them you can start with Elon's book on the 10 myths of Israel if you want to know a bit more about the difference between Zionism and Judaism. But there are many other excellent books apart from my book on this. So many good people wrote about it, and it's very easy to be knowledgeable and educated about that issue.
Thank you so much. And
That
thank
was
you,
perfect.
Bill, for asking that very
Yeah, it's an important question.
I'm
It's
reading
No
the
doubt.
Eric Chavis told me about the book I'm reading. I'm your book is next, but I'm reading The Invention of the Jewish People by Shlomo.
Yeah, Shlomo Zand.
Yeah, it's
That's a
just
very,
it's
it's an
a good book.
intriguing book.
Yeah, does it still hold up in your mind?
Well, as I said to Zohara in my first answer, I'm less worried whether the Jews are the descendants of the Khazars, as Shlomo claims, or they are the descendants of the Jews who lived under Roman times, as the Zionists claim. I don't mind what they think about themselves. I mind what they do in the name of a narrative.
Right.
So I'm less focused on finding out whether who our ancestors built, or Zohara's ancestors built, were 2,000 years ago, or my own ancestors 2,000 years ago. As an historian, I'm not intrigued by these questions. You know, I'm much more intrigued by what happened in the last 200, 300 years, what human beings do to other human beings, and how we stop the bad things that they're doing to each other. That's for me is a life mission.
I didn't realize in his book that there was in Israel, there's a Jewish history department and a history department. That was fascinating to me in university.
Yeah, that is true. That is very important to mention.
That's
Absolutely.
fascinating. Jewish history. Well, thank you so much. I don't want to take up any of your time. It's been wonderful.
Okay. Thank you very much. And it was great seeing you both.
Okay, thank you.
And all the best.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All the best. All the best. Thank you.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Zahara.
Bye-bye.
Hey, so I'm going to get this going now. That's great. I think you did great. How did you feel?
Oh, I thought the whole thing went great. And I am so glad you brought up the anti-Semitism, because that was not on on my sheet here. And it's so critical. And you would have thought I would have thought of, because you might know that I'm being slammed by the president of the University of Florida as an anti-Semite, and no longer teaching anti-Semitic dribble on the campus of UF.
Yeah,
I mean, so I'm glad you brought it up.
My hope is more that, like, even if we don't use that for the show, that we can use that separately, because I think it'll be a good clip. And we can put that on the website, and then people will come to us. If you have enough of people saying stuff that, even if you don't use it in the program on the 25th, but you use it in general, it might make some rounds and people start sharing it. So that'd be good.
Oh, I agree totally. Thank you, Bill. Thank you.
So, all right, I'm gonna start editing on this and get where I got a bunch to edit today and tomorrow, and we got tomorrow we have your other thing, right?
Yes. Now, what time is that? Because my poor brain.
That's 4 o'clock. Hang on. That's 4 p.m. Eastern. I'll send you a link on that.
Okay, and I'm going to